I really struggled with which time bandit I wanted to talk with you about. In the end, the topic of perfectionism, idealistic thinking, won out. A good amount of the people that I work with are challenged with this issue. It's also one that I personally work on as well, so I do talk about this from experience. I call myself a recovering perfectionist. I'm still a work in progress on that. We all need to do high quality work, but excessive attention to detail can do more harm than good. In his book, The Pursuit of Perfect, Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar tells us there are two types of perfectionism: adaptive and maladaptive perfectionism. Adaptive perfectionists work on developing their skills. Their standards are always rising, and they approach work with optimism, pleasure, and a desire to improve. Clearly, a healthy type of perfectionism. Maladaptive perfectionists, by contrast, are never satisfied with what they achieve. It's never good enough. If something isn't perfect, they dismiss it. They may also experience fear of failure, doubt, unhappiness, and other painful emotions. We need to understand the difference between maladaptive perfectionism and a healthy quest for success. Maladaptive perfectionists see mistakes as unacceptable and think that these lead others to see them as incompetent. People striving for excellence in a healthy way see mistakes as an opportunity to grow. They understand that mistakes are a growing part of the learning process, and they accept them. So for the purpose of this section, we're going to focus on the maladaptive perfectionist. Clearly, you need to work hard and deliver the best results possible. But the consequences of the need for everything perfect are costly. You're being wasteful when you think tweaking your work once you've got it completed is going to help it. And when it gets out of hand, it can hold you back professionally and personally. So let's look at some of the consequences. Compromised general health. Perfectionism has been linked to health issues such as eating disorders, depression, migraines, anxiety, and more. Poor self-esteem. It has a negative impact on self-esteem. Perfectionists see their self-worth tied into what they achieve, and they believe that they're judged on this by others. Because they're never satisfied with their achievements, they can never live up to the standards they set for themselves. This can lead to a downward spiral of self-criticism and blame. Procrastination. A perfectionist tends to conjure up an immaculate vision of how things should be, and it usually involves a lot of work in their minds. And it's already hard to get stuff done. If it needs to be perfect, then they avoid starting it because it's too daunting. And because of this procrastination, perfectionists often fall behind on their work. This can affect their reputation and work relationships. It affects creativity. One of the consequences is that it has an inhibiting nature. Perfectionism keeps us from taking risks, and it constrains our playfulness and our desire to learn. This, in turn, reduces our ability to innovate and be creative. Stress with a guarantee. Perfectionism and work stress always go hand in hand. As the perfectionist feels the pressure of completing each project to an imagined level of perfectionism, he will often become stressed as the work he completes does not meet his standards or the expectations he perceives others have of him. It wastes time. Time spent adjusting, tweaking, readjusting over and over eats up precious working hours. Years ago, I worked with a gentleman he was a manager in a large company, and there was a weekly report that needed to be filled in by every manager in that section. And so as the spreadsheet would be passed down the line, when it would reach my client, he would spend an inordinate amount of time adjusting the columns, adjusting the fonts, because everything was different. And once he got it looking just tickety-boo, then he'd pass it on. And then the next week, that same spreadsheet would come through with all that adjusting that needed to be redone again, over and over and over. It seemed that he just could not help himself. When you set perfectionism as the standard for all your objectives, you're being unnecessarily harsh on yourself. It lowers productivity. You spend too much time on it because one becomes extremely detail-oriented about every single thing. You get weighed down by every problem, and you get caught up by the need to create everything, well, perfectly. They keep correcting tiny mistakes that don't make a difference. Turning off that need for everything to be done to exacting standards isn't an easy thing to do, though. It takes a desire to change and constant vigilance, to be more self-aware so that when you catch yourself in the midst of this behavior, you can shift your direction. So let's look at some strategies for becoming a healthier perfectionist. And you can follow along with these in your workbook that are on page 40. Done is better than perfect. Just like the example I just shared about my client and a spreadsheet, getting it done is far more important than making it look great. Jump in and finish what you start. Don't allow your perfectionism to prevent you from starting or completing a project. As a matter of fact, if you've been holding off starting something because you're still getting your ducks in a row, my suggestion is to just dive in and start. Sometimes clarity comes from doing. Draw the line. Use the 80-20 rule. That is, 80% is the finished product, and you eliminate that 20% that you spend making it just right. This frees you up to take on the next task or project. Strict time limits. If you give yourself 3 hours to complete something, you'll take 3 hours to complete it. If you give yourself 1 hour, it'll take you 1 hour. So set a reasonable time limit, maybe with some rules, like no unnecessary research or no fancy formatting as examples. And when the time is up, move on to another task or take a break. And here's a tip for you if you're going to do that. Set the timer to give you a 5 or 10 minute warning that you're running out of time. I find that if I set the intention to stop working on something at a specific time, I work more efficiently and I'm likely to stick to that self-imposed time frame. Embrace mistakes. Be okay with making mistakes. All humans do. Attempting to achieve 100% perfection is highly ineffective. The more you open yourself to making mistakes, the quicker you can get down to learning from them rather than viewing them as personal flaws. And question your beliefs and challenge your thinking. Is it really so important for everything that you do to be just so? What are the costs versus the benefits of spending excessive time making something ultra perfect? Strive for excellence versus perfection. Life is full of imperfection. Of course, it's important to give your very best, but always seeking and striving for perfection in all that you do will prevent you from being your best possible self. It actually works against you. Perfectionism isn't profitable. Something done imperfectly on time is often better than something done perfectly but late. Don't waste time with details that don't really matter in the end. Remember, your job is to make sure things get done, one priority at a time. Okay, so just one last piece on this topic. I want to talk about unnecessary complexity. You'll see at the bottom of page 40, I've got a crazy looking mathematical formula there. I took a time management course once, and the instructor used this formula as a way of demonstrating how a perfectionist's mind works. So you'll see that there's a 1 plus 1, and then it's followed by this crazy convoluted formula that really in the end amounts to 2. You know, the mind creates unnecessary complexity to everything. As you look at your own life and your own systems, do you see areas of unnecessary complexity? Are there needless steps involved in doing something that's relatively simple? You may want to recreate this and post it somewhere as a reminder to simplify the things you tend to add this layer of complexity to. And on page 41, there's a chart there that you may want to reference for descriptions of excellence versus perfectionism. And I've also given additional resources on your webpage if you're interested in learning more about this topic. So that is it for perfectionism. The last time bandit is weak boundaries. Please be sure to read the material, do the activity, and I want you to post something to the discussion forum. All right, we'll see you in the next section.